Okei, eiköhän siirrytä sitten varsinaiseen asiaan. Meillä ohjelmassa tässä ensimmäisenä on Hytiäisen Mika maanpuolustuskorkeakoulusta, joka avaa meille tätä haastetta. And we will be changing to English language so that the first part of our seminar will be interactive with our international guests also. But I will first give the floor or the scene to Mika Hytiäinen, who will be opening our minds in understanding the maps. So, Mika, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juha. I'm a former military professor, but still active in the National Defense University. And I think that the spark that initiated this session is actually given by me, because I was triggered about how mostly media, but also other parties showed or used maps in the COVID-19 incidents. I made
even though that I'm a military officer, I made my dissertation in the GIS analysis in Helsinki University of Technology in the 2003. And actually that was the key part, because why I'm now a professor. And I'm also trying to guide Nina, who is going to talk also today about some issues in this area. But visualization is not actually my strong point. I got triggered about three things, and I now try to ask if you can see my presentation at the moment. Yeah, it's okay. So three things that kind of got me in here. I have to find how to change also the presentation. Let's see whether I can. Yeah, now it works. So the first one was actually, it was regarding me, because when we started, they were starting to ask questions about those who got infected or were somewhere. That where were you a week ago? And of course, nobody can remember, or somebody can remember, but I can't. What was my situation in the places about 5 days or 7 days ago? So I put my Google on. So Google tracked me all of this through the COVID situation, and then I started to understand about how the COVID works, and actually, what's most for me, it's most important places are those places where we meet. So hopping points for the virus, and I was starting to discuss with with the doctors that could we get some specimens at least from those reports that they were making, where people live and where they work. Of course, that's something, but all of those places where they thought that there was an infection, that virus hopped, or maybe even they knew that was the place. And then, of course, one of the things that we found out also in this forum was that this kind of information is forbidden and dangerous. So you can't actually get this kind of information at the moment. But I think that in a few years' time, when the situation is over, we can get also this. But this was some kind of phenomena that you can't actually understand it easily, because they are time-related places, and of course I was not interested about one person, but a lot of many of these kind of routes, and actually those hopping points. The second one was actually time, because the time and space combining those is a difficult thing, and I was trying to get for me the understanding how this is evolving. Well, there were some presentations like you see there from the Helsingin Sanomat about how many infections they measured in every day when the
with their data. But what I was needing was actually what's happening today, because this is something that virus did 5 days ago. Of course, it takes some time, so I would like to have some kind of estimation what is happening now, and you can't find an estimation. Also, one thing that we also did in Finland, and this is the presentations from Sweden, because the company was the same, Telia. They were presenting how much people are moving. So what's the difference in moving? But then the presentations, what I found were discussing about what we are showing in the maps. Are we showing how many persons there are, how many kilometers there are, how many hectares there are, or should we show everything in percentage? And I was starting to think whether I should be alarmed as an individual, not as a scientist. And then my point that I actually triggered in writing also in my blog, because in Finland we are presenting everything on maps on hectares. We had just the election yesterday, and now we know that the hectares were going to vote, and now most of the Finland is green because it's for the center party. But actually Finland is not green. Finland is like in the right hand size in there, where I picked a map where all the areas are, the area size is the same as the population in the area. So if you think the map in the middle, you could say that, well, there's nothing to worry about. But if you then take the map on the right, you found out that actually Helsinki area is the most infected one, and actually it is one of the biggest area in the whole Finland, and we really should be alarmed. On the other hand, the other area in the north, it looks in the map about the same size and the same alarm as in Helsinki, but when you put it in the right, well, it's a tiny spot. And also the left-hand side was actually using the logarithmic scale. I can understand why the virus pandemic scientist uses the logarithms, but for the normal people, they actually are not so good if you're thinking how much virus there is in your neighborhood. And the same thing you can show in that way. But I think these were kind of, I don't say mistakes, and I don't claim that we were misguided, but I think that happened. At least that happened to me, and I was quite alarmed about the using of GIS in this way. And now, when you heard why I was triggered, I have a honor to introduce our first keynote speaker, Menno-Jan Kraak, who is going to give his presentation. He's a professor in the University of Twente in Netherlands, and actually he's writing books about the things that we are now discussing today. For example, the mapping for sustainable world for United Nations, where he was not only one of the writers, also the guy who actually kind of gathered the people together. And you are actually making the books that we others are reading. So I hope that you will first guide us how we should do these things, and then we heard in the later how we actually do these things. Thank you. Menno-Jan, the floor is yours.
Yes. I'll share my screen. Okay, then there's always this question, can you see my screen? Because I don't see it. That's...
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And the first short introduction with the issues, I think they were head-on, because some of these I will also discuss. And we did not tackle this from the COVID perspective, but from the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals perspective. And what I would like to do in my short presentation is I split it in 3 parts. I first will tell you something about the book. Then I will tell you the dilemmas we have as cartographers, but I also should point out the dilemmas map users have. And actually in the previous talk, both have been somehow briefly addressed. So first, the book. The book was written as an initiative of the International Cartographic Association in close cooperation with the United Nations. And as a result, the book is now available as an online ebook in the UN library, and the web link is available here, and the presentation will be made available to you, and you can all have a look or download that one. It has also appeared as a paper copy, but in a very limited edition, and this has been issued to the participants of the ICA conference, which was held in December in Florence. And basically the structure of the book, or the setup of the book, is that we try to address all kinds of topics which are relevant for people who would like to make maps. And especially we were aiming at people who are mapping SDG indicator data. So every topic has a 2-page spread. Of course, we have maps, we have diagrams, there are keywords which you find back in a glossary. There are all kinds of links. And every section is no more than 500 words. And that was quite a challenge to write about every topic in a very condensed way. And if you look at the content of the book, it has 4 major parts. We look at the SDGs and the geospatial data. We look at map design considerations. We then look, okay, what kind of maps and diagrams do we have available? And of course, it's also important to realize where the user will use the map, because that decides also on how the design should be dealt with. So of each 4, I'll give you one example. So when it comes to the SDGs and geospatial data, we have been using the database of the United Nations Statistics Office, which collect all kinds of data. This data is not complete. Not every country is always delivering the data. Not all the data or all the indicators, and I realize there are more than 230, are mappable. They don't always have a geospatial component. Having said this, that's not completely right, because every country delivers a number. So you can always map it on a country, but it has not been all prepared well. After we looked at this data, we did a data analysis, because you want to know, is this indicator an absolute value? Is it an index, or is it a nominal value? Because that decides on how you can map it. And here number 3 is an example of a map which we created. Then, of course, and you will all be aware of it, there are all kinds of map design considerations. And we also, in the second part of the book, we wrote about those. So here people can see, okay, in number 1 here, the process, which steps to go through when you have to make a map. But later you will see that at every step we have choices and we can make mistakes. So it's not as straightforward as it sometimes looks in these nice diagrams in books. And on the right side, there's a little example. We wanted to make a map for children about the, in this case, about the availability of clean drinking water. So you then would like to adapt the map design to children. So symbols should not be too complex. In this case, we just selected a bottle and we filled it with water, so to say, depending on the percentage of people who have this clean drinking water available. Then, of course, we have a whole tool set of map types available. And here, number 1, which map type? Each of these map types are discussed in the book in detail. So nominal maps for qualitative data, choropleth maps, proportional point symbol maps, etc. Similar for diagrams, because also with diagrams, and often, as you can see at the bottom, the combination of both maps and diagrams, they often allow you to tell the story much more in a much more clear way than just a map or just a diagram. So we advocate for this combination, and therefore we also elaborated quite a bit on the different diagrams and how they can deal with the different types of data. And then, of course, the map environment. Yeah, usually you might think, okay, I developed something for a desktop, but nowadays, of course, people go mobile, and then your maps have to be adaptive to the medium where you present. And of course, when we designed the book, everything was oriented towards paper, no interactivity. And of course, that limits you, because with interactive maps, you can do so much more. But it's therefore still a challenge to map it the old-fashioned way, so to say, to design the maps on paper. And here you also see a page from the book, number 3, Atlas, and it's from the Atlas design, because we have designed the book as if it was an atlas, showing that we had a kind of layout, which was always the same and still different on all the pages. So the whole book was split in 8 columns. There was a space in the middle, the gutter, where you fold the page, so to say. And everything was geared to those, on a single page, to 4 columns. It would always cover this. So we had a freedom, and still it all looks the same, so to say. And that's for the design aspect. And here you see an example of the result. I mean, at the end, we added everything up, and then we realized that all the maps are new. So they were all originally made for this book, that we almost did 100 maps, and another almost 70 schematic maps, diagrams, and many other figures. So it's a wealth of new visualizations, trying to explain cartography, so to say, using the SDG data, because nearly every map has been created based on data found in this UN database. So I think that's also quite unique, but it also resulted in quite a struggle, because sometimes we had a plan, and then you looked at the data and it was incomplete, and you had to find another indicator. We also tried to map as many different indicators as possible to show the diversity of the data. And also we had interesting challenges in working with the UN, because as you probably are aware, it's a very political organization. And if you mention the word boundary, then all kind of red flags pop up. So they are very sensitive with boundaries, and you quickly do it wrong, let's say. But we learned from each other that yes, you have to take care of this political side of mapping. You can say, okay, I follow just the basic theory and I make a good map, but there is more to it, and that's probably what we cartographers learned during this process. Of course, the book is not covering everything. It focuses on those indicators. So it's not telling us about topographic maps. It's not telling us about continuous data. It's only data related to administrative units. We didn't go into advanced technology with VR, etc. And we didn't cover map ethics. I come back to these map ethics at a later point. And of course, it's not interactive. And so if this is a figure from the book, but of course it would be great if the book online would allow you indeed, hey, let's go to 2005 and see what happens. And if I move to 2015, what's the change? And what happens if I change my map from a proportional point symbol map to a cartogram? Or what are the values from Brazil and how did it develop over time? I mean, these are the things you can do and the questions you can ask if you have an interactive environment. In paper, we had only snapshots, but okay, you will be aware of this. But to make this all online, of course, that would be even a bigger effort of the team. And yeah, we don't have the resources to do this. Okay, the book. Again, available to all of you. Cartographers' dilemmas. Yeah, you can think dilemmas. I mean, we have a textbook, and in this textbook, like this book here, everything is written how to do it. So what can be the problem? Well, let's have a look. First of all, we look at this process again, the cartographic workflow. I showed it to you very briefly before, and it's described in one section in the book. And for, between these boxes, things happen, of course, and you could add those. Of course, you cannot read them now, but they are all in the book on the right side of these double page topic description. But what I would like to show you is, okay, everywhere things can go wrong. And because if you don't have a proper plan, you will not end up with a good map. And if you work with your data, as I said before, then suddenly you realize that the data is incomplete, or there are errors, or there are other issues. So you have to adapt your plan. And then very often, if people make maps, they use, let's say, ArcGIS or QGIS, and they just load the data, push a button, make a map. So they work with the defaults of the software. And that's also asking for trouble. So you always have to realize, is this default the one I need? And probably it's not, because most often it's a boilerplate map. And if there are good maps which have very bad characteristics, then they are boilerplate maps. And then, of course, you have to clean your data, as I said. That takes lots of time. And usually it's most of the time. And then, of course, you select your map type, and that's, of course, crucial to make sure that the message gets across. But then, you can do many things wrong. You can select the wrong map projection, the wrong symbology, the wrong colors, etc., etc. And this I would like to illustrate with an example in the next slides. So for this, I took the Gender Inequality Index. And the UN provides a table like this. And you see here the names on alphabetical order, and every country, when known, has a number behind it. And if it's close to 0, it's good, because then there is less inequality. And if it's close to 1, it's bad. And then it's an inequality. And I'm afraid the inequality always is in the disadvantage of the women, which is bad, of course. So you would like to have a number which is close to 0. But of course, look at this type of data. If I ask you now, where's Finland, you have to go through the alphabet and try to find a number. And then if you want to compare it with the Netherlands, you have to find that doesn't work very easily. So you can make a map. And what I ask you now is just a little mental exercise. And this is the map we want to create. And of course, we don't have a time for you to make this, but now in your mind, it's an index, so it's a number between 1 and 0. How would you map it? Take a few seconds, what you think how your map would look like. Now, since in my talk with the organizers of this event, they were very strict on time, so I have to go. I don't give you much time to think. But I did this exercise at the UN, at a UN event at one point in time. And then I asked the people to draw it on paper. And here you see the results. So on the left, I think you see people who, I would say, are on the right track. So often it results in a boilerplate map. It's an ordered series between 0 and 1. And on the other, on the right side, you see all kinds of examples created by people who use different colors, different symbols, all kinds of things, which we would not advise to you to do. So again, back to this index. And if you then think, okay, let's further analyze what we have. And then you could map it like this. So let me see, just that you cannot read all these small prints, I indicated where Finland is. But here you can see the whole array of data, and it starts on the left with Yemen, and it has a poor inequality index. And of course, the way you present this data already, gives you a certain perception on the problem. Eh? So since we in our part of the world we read from right to left, what you will have is that you might be a bit depressed because look, bad numbers, very high numbers at the left of my column, and only at the end we end up in those countries which usually are good in those lists. That's Scandinavian countries are always scoring very well. So you could also do it like this and just map the data from the good ones, so to say, the low index value to the high. And then you might start to read such a figure. Oh, that's nice. It's okay. Oh yeah, there are a few bad countries. So again, what I want to say is that depending on how you present your data, that will already set the tone of how people think, of how people perceive a certain issue. And I think that's something we have to consider. So is it fair to start with a high number? Or is it fair to start with a low number? And this comes to this map ethics issue later on. So for instance, here I mapped it and the index, and yeah, I used orange. Orange is the Dutch national color. So if I make let's say a neutral map, here we go again. It's not neutral, but then I use this color range, and here we see where the countries are which have some work to do, you could argue, and some countries which should keep going, or yeah, you can always improve, of course, as long as it's not zero. Okay, then here we have the same topic, but in a different color. And also I would like to address briefly the effect of the map projection, because that also is quite a problem. This is a equal area map projection, which is very useful for color plate maps. But of course, if you use all kinds of online software, we end up with this, because the Mercator projection is always used in these online systems like OpenStreetMap, Google Maps, etc. Simply because the longitude and latitude are perpendicular to each other. They can prepare all these tiles and quickly serve it when people move around in the map. But it's very bad for these topics, of course. And yeah, you could also do it differently. And let's say, oh, sorry, this goes too quick. Yes, so here I converted it into a cartogram. And then you don't only see the index, but you also see the amount of people affected. And so that means that, let's say in India, which is here the biggest country now, yeah, there are billions of people who suffer under this number, this index number, so to say, the high index number. So this again gives you a different perspective on the issue. And it was very nice in Scandinavia, but Scandinavia almost disappears on this map, because there are only a few of those people, so to say. So these are always issues you have to consider when making these maps. Okay, coming back here, I told you I used orange, but you can play with colors. And by playing and choosing colors, you can emphasize or de-emphasize the issue or the problem. So let's say on the far right, on the far right, you have a green map, but then, yeah, dark green is in Africa, where it's high index, but dark green might give us the impression that everything is good. So the green hides the problem, you could argue. And if you go to the far left, is the opposite. We use red. We know it's a danger. Something is going on. And there it's very clear that it emphasizes those countries where this index is very high and where something has to happen. And in between, you see the opposite to those two, the red and the green. And of course, yeah, you could use the green where Europe is dark green, so there it's okay. But then again, you might underplay the African issue because it's light green and it doesn't attract your attention, because the dark green attracts your attention. So it plays down the issue again. So playing with colors is important to realize that if you make choices, what kind of effect these have. Of course, you could say, okay, we choose a kind of boundary value and where you a threshold, where you say below the threshold it's okay and above the threshold it's not okay. That's what you could do. But again, with the equal inequality index, where's a threshold? A threshold should be 0, but okay. Then of course, we all know we can play with the number of classes. And so again, if you have a pattern which is based on 2 classes, it's a completely different pattern than when it's based on 6 classes. And then you can even play with the classification method you apply, because even there you can play down or play up the severity of certain issues. So there's quite a set of design considerations you have to make. And of course, if you follow defaults of a program, the map probably is okay, but the message it brings across might not be what you would like to do. And there's another issue with these color plate maps, because they are used a lot, and somehow it was already shown in the Finland COVID map earlier. I mean, I took Canada as an example, but Finland is a similar example, because Canada, the whole country has the same color value, so you might think that a phenomena is homogeneously distributed over the country, which of course is not. So look at a population distribution and you then map Canada, then everything is in a few miles from the US border, so to say. And in Finland, everybody lives in Helsinki. I mean, I exaggerate. Okay, so those were our dilemmas. So we have lots of tools, we have lots of opportunities, but we have to realize that if we make a choice, you can, let's say, and now I make it black and white, you can go right or wrong, so to say. But then, of course, we also have to look at the map user. How does the map user look at maps, and what kind of issues do they face? So let's look at this map. I showed this earlier. It's a map based on the percentage of forest, and it has been mapped as a color plate map using the UN statistical unit. So the UN has split the world in these areas, and I would like to focus on Middle Africa. And Middle Africa runs from Chad to Angola. And if you think of forest, and in this case, if you would read the legend, it would say that you have a percentage of forest somewhere 60–70% coverage. But then we have an issue, because if you would zoom in to this, what they call Middle Africa, you go to Chad, then you can see that Chad has only 3% coverage with forests. And so would people who see this world map, would they realize that within this area, the homogeneous distribution of such a topic is not the case? And simply because Chad belongs to statistically Middle Africa, but probably we all know, oh, it's in the Sahara, there are not many trees there. So again, if you look at these maps, people do not always realize what they see. And again, the maps of Finland, which were shown before, it's a similar dilemma. And should we not inform the user that these issues exist? And I think that's something I would love to promote, that somehow we might think we make the best map we can make, but it's always somehow biased. And therefore, I think we should help the user. And I think how we can do that is, and that is one solution, but that's one of my ideas, is to apply all kinds of annotations in the map. And so I think, even though the user might be well informed and well versed with reading the maps, but even I guess we as professionals might sometimes get on the wrong foot by looking at the map. So somehow we should justify the choices that we make. We should justify and explain the maps we have used. And I think that could be done by interactive annotations in the map. And that's my final part of my talk. I would like to give you a few examples which I created based on the SDG maps on how we could help the user. And I categorize these annotations in 5 categories. So we can inform them a little bit about the data behind the map. We should tell them about the map type we use. Maybe we even have to explain the story of the map, the pattern, what kind of pattern do we see, why do we see it? If it's an online version, we might inform the user of the map functionality. What can he do? And something about these ethics. So in this case, we look at the map of Africa. It's an SDG indicator 12.2.2, and it's about the petroleum consumption in Africa. And okay, so what you could do is just inform the reader, okay, you see the lowest category. There are many countries in that lowest category, but which one has the lowest value, for instance? People are always interested in extremes, and you could give the highest value. So by just allowing you that people, let's say, push a button, give me the extremes, that this pops up in the map. Also, you could tell a little bit about the map type. Okay, we work with a choroplate map, but then you might give a warning. You might say, hey, look, this classification scheme we have applied, that might influence the pattern on the map. And so you might show alternatives with different patterns, so to say, or the number of classes. I mean, these are the things I just mentioned earlier. Yeah, maybe you should warn. And then this is an interactive environment. So maybe people can look at a different map type to look at this particular issue. Like I used a cartogram at one point in time with the world map. And it also has a slider where you can go through time so they can see trends and developments. So these could be annotations to help the map reader better appreciate the map and yeah, the story of the map. Another one. This is the proportion of the population which have access to a 2G mobile network. Of course, we now all try to have a phone which can handle 5G, but this is 2017 global picture. And then again, the map looks, and that's about the story. It looks that the whole world has access to 2G, because let's say Brazil is fully blue. In the dark blue, but probably it's about the population who have access to it. So the populated areas are covered. But what about in the Amazon area? Is there a coverage at all? I mean, that's what the map is not telling us. And so it might even be that, I doubt that most part of Brazil might be even without coverage. And so these are things you might not immediately see, but you can inform the user about. That, of course, if you talk about the story, the cartographer might not always be the expert in the topic they are mapping. So you might need help. And of course, you could also say something about the ethics. I mean, I categorize it here, that say what map projection you used and why. Because if this would be Mercator, you have to point out what the issues are. And you might also inform about the data. Where did you get the data from? Who produced the data? I mean, these are not new issues, but yeah, sometimes it's important to inform the people about these things. And my last example is then about undernourishment in Africa, part of Africa. And again, you could show the values of each of the countries. You could again say, hey, it's a choroplate map. But then, hey, please have in mind, the phenomena are not homogeneously distributed. And again, I select the chart again, and now you can imagine what will follow. Because indeed, you could display ancillary data, for instance, where are the people living in relation to this undernourishment theme. And then you will see that, yeah, the people are mainly living the south of Chad and Niger because of the climate conditions. And then you might try to re-express the map in a dasymmetric map, where you consider indeed that these northern parts of these countries are more or less empty. And then again, you could give you data values, and then you might paint a slightly different picture. So this ends my presentation. So again, I would like to say, please use the book. All the material in the book is also available in the maps on websites in GitHub, so you can have all the data, the maps. Even some courses are available to use QGIS and create basic maps. because we also advocate, let's say, what we call open educational resources. It's a bit conflicting for myself, so to say, because I also wrote another book. And if you go to Amazon, you have to pay $150 for this book. Now with this free book, nobody will buy that one. So I have to prepare for a different tension environment. And of course, yeah, please discuss all these issues and discuss with your colleagues and critique always the maps. It's always good to, if you see a map, try to find a mistake. Sometimes you won't find them, of course, but very often you do. Oh yes, and I would like to show you this this stamp. I started with stamps of the SDGs, and climate action, very important, but that's also the only stamp with a map on it. And since that's one of my hobbies, I had to show this to you. So here I will end my presentation. Thank you very much. And I will stop sharing my screen then.
Thank you, Minna, for the most inspiring presentation. I read my cartography close to 40 years ago, and it still is challenging to make a map for a professional, and you proved it's challenging to understand the map for everybody. So there's this thing, artificial intelligence. I hope that will solve both of the problems one day, but then we will not exist in the middle at all. But really, really interesting. I hope you can stay with us for another 20 minutes or so, because Juha Oksanen from the Land Survey in Finland will be giving us the next presentation of some thoughts, and then we have a chance to discuss before our break. So Juha, the floor is yours. You are muted.
Yes, I see. I have some issues. I need to reorganize my desktop. Can you see the slides at the moment?
Yes.
Excellent. So then we can start. So thanks, first of all, for Minna for the very inspiring talk. And I see that there are some nice, maybe even overlaps with the presentation I will have. And good afternoon to everybody. So my name is Juha Oksanen, and I'm the director of the Department of Geoinformatics and Cartography at the Finnish Geospatial Research Institute in the National Land Survey of Finland. While the webinar organizers gave me the title, "What are we telling with maps today?" I got truly confused. What can I say about what is told with maps when different types of map uses are just enormous, and it's extremely difficult to find any structured view on the functions of those uses. But luckily, after the second thought, I realized that I just have to simplify the scope and make an approach that is somehow manageable. For this presentation, we leave a large amount of maps out of scope and say simply that with maps, we are telling stories, which has an influence on something. By this definition, we leave huge amount of different types of general purpose maps, such as topographic maps, out of the scope of the presentation. And in a similar way, for example, we leave maps designed for navigation purposes and viral maps published in social media platforms out of the discussion. But if we focus on maps where people are at least trying to communicate important spatial information to other people through media or official map services, and I will approach the topic by two themes, focusing on two fundamentally different aspects of storytelling. The first theme comes to the map ethics that Minna was talking about, and it's about maps telling about borders and especially disputed borders. Maps as means for showing political power and territorial views is a classical theme in cartography. And persuasive maps have been made over centuries. They primarily intended to influence opinions or beliefs rather than to communicate neutrally about geographic settings. But while quickly thinking, it's typically this type of cartography is typically seen to be somehow wrong, but it's anyhow good to remind what, for example, Finnish cartographers or actually Russian cartographers living in the Grand Duchy of Finland, what they did in 1899 when they published the world's first national atlas. Because for the atlas, they prepared a general map of Finland having identical national borders towards the United Kingdoms of Sweden and Norway and Russia. And by this visual trick, they showed Finland as an independent nation while being non-dependent in reality at that time. While the theme itself is ages old, it has now new interesting implications by the return of geo and power politics. Also, our present-day understanding of information operations and hybrid operations and how media and social media is used for influencing general opinions makes it critical to understand what should be taken into account when showing borders on maps for public audience. And while the return of power politics has brought back a certain amount of concerns related to global security, at the same time, it has brought interesting times for people being fascinated about cartography and how maps are used in creating worldview. For some reason, recently maps have been visible where the power is. Seeing is believing, and world leaders want to see, and they also want public audience to see the world through their own kaleidoscope. For this purpose, maps and other geovisualizations are a perfect vehicle. At the same time, we overuse visual material in digital media, and people are hungry to see impressive visualizations that are easy to understand. As such, good visualizations have become important means for populistic leaders to influence on general opinions. One of the golden era of cartography happened during the presidency of Donald Trump, when, based on my subjective impression on following media, there was general discussion on there was more general discussion on cartography and what people tell with maps. My personal favorite is the Sharpie-gate happened in September 2019, when President Trump warned that Hurricane Dorian will hit the US mainland, and for some reason, most likely accidentally, included Alabama in the warning. Based on the official predictions of the storm path, Alabama was not in reality under the threat. The name Sharpie-gate came from the fact that President Trump modified the contents of the official hurricane track map to correspond his own understanding of the threat by using a Sharpie pencil. For me, this was a demonstration of President Trump's understanding of the influence of telling stories by using maps. The visual message is extremely efficient, and it can be easily harnessed to serve your personal preferences. But when coming back to power politics, a truly interesting example of handling disputed borders in mass media happened in spring 2014, when Russia invaded Crimea, and in addition to fostering the attack in the eastern parts of Ukraine. Mass media was completely surprised by the event, and the editorial offices of the media houses had to make quick decisions on how maps of Ukraine need to be presented. When looking maps published in Helsingin Sanomat, the biggest newspaper in Finland, in early spring 2014, the setting was quite clear. The border between Russia and Ukraine was placed clearly in the Kerch Strait, as it should be. But as summer 2014 came, the border first disappeared, and by the end of summer, the Crimea was presented appropriately as a disputed region. Later, the policy somehow changed in Helsingin Sanomat, and they started to show, as they defined themselves, de facto borders instead of de jure borders. And by this excuse, again by their own wording, they didn't express their own opinion, but rather wanted to show the world as it is. And at some moment, the policy changed once more. And for example, in last November, Helsingin Sanomat showed border between Russia and Ukraine, again back in the Kerch Strait. The idea of not showing your opinion by presenting de facto borders was not done alone by Helsingin Sanomat, but it's actually a more generally accepted principle within the community of map makers. And here, for example, National Geographic Society has had the long-standing cartographic policy to portray the world from de facto point of view, or as they say themselves, to portray to the best of their judgment the current reality. But in the web, there are a large number of articles describing National Geographic's decision to show Crimea as part of Russia. But when reflecting the policy, it is a bit confusing to see this National Geographic's world base map as it is at the moment available in the web, where Crimea anyway is presented clearly as a part of Ukraine. The question of not showing your opinion by presenting de facto borders is clearly questioned in our present time, when information and hybrid operations are seen to be an essential part of modern geopolitics. And in the modern world, for a media house, it is impossible to announce that they are not showing an opinion by presenting a map, because they have no control on how their presentations are used. So no matter if you are not willing to show your opinion, since under populistic motivations, the opinion can still easily be put onto you, especially if you have let space for that. For example, de facto maps of Crimea borders can easily be used in Russia to present how West has accepted the invasion of Crimea. An interesting approach to this challenge of neutrality has been implemented by Google, who has taken the question of disputed borders very seriously. They have defined that they want to provide the most comprehensive and accurate maps possible based on ground truth. Their solution to be fully neutral on disputed regions is to provide local versions of the map, depending on who uses the map and where. This approach in a way leaves everybody happy, but of course one might still question, is it really better to provide large number of alternative realities instead of providing a worldview that is based on international agreements? Personally, I don't have the wisdom to say what here is right, but maybe the solution that cartographers have created long time ago, where disputed regions are openly represented as disputed regions, might still be the best solution. And while Crimea is maybe the most interesting example on the cartographic representation of disputed regions for Europeans, there are of course large number of similar sensitive issues around the world. And one recent example how sensitive even thematic maps may be was shown in late 2021 in virtual summit of democracy organized by the White House, where the Taiwan's digital minister Audrey Tang held a speech and showed a map which ranks the world by openness on civil rights. In this map, Taiwan was labeled in green, making it the only regional entity described as open, while all the others, including several US allies and partners who were also participants in the summit, were shown as being closed, repressed, obstructed, or narrowed. Minister Tang was let to have the talk as planned, but in the following panel discussion, Tang's camera and video was turned off. The White House explained it as being turned off by accident, but there is also other opinions that maybe the camera was turned off just to avoid the antagonizing China. But to sum up, border on a map is always a border, and handling of disputed regions is highly sensitive, and people making maps of disputed regions should be very much aware of the power of map and be extremely clear related to the message the map is intended to carry. If the map maker is unwilling to give the clear message, the others will put the message to the map anyway. My second theme is about maps telling about different types of phenomena. These are the maps that are used or which makes use for a lot of data behind them, and they are used to transmit information about phenomena, typically to the general public or decision makers. The most topical theme in this group are COVID-19 maps published by global, but also local actors. And while they are meant to increase our situation awareness by providing a situation picture of the current state of the pandemic, one might still well question if these maps are really doing that. The most famous map published by Johns Hopkins University collects huge amount of corona-related data to one simple dashboard containing maps and diagrams. If we stop for a while, for example, on the map describing the total number of COVID-19 cases, we can find out number of problematic issues, and we can really ask if this information improves our understanding of the current state of the pandemic. Firstly, if we look how the data is classified, we see that the extremely skewed data is presented here by using 10 different classes that have a logarithmic nature. While the size of the smallest class is something like 50,000 cases, the second biggest class covers 3.5 million cases, and the biggest one as many as 39 million cases. Changes in the symbol size are marginal, making a visual distinction of two neighboring classes extremely difficult. Secondly, the data behind the service makes use of different administrative units depending on the country they represent. While some of the countries, the data is represented at country level, the other countries make use of other more detailed administrative units. And this, of course, makes comparison of cases in different countries in practice impossible. The practical implication is that the map user sees countries with different size of point symbols without really understanding the properties of the data behind the map. If the purpose of the map is not to transmit the information of the data that is used for creating it, one might, of course, question then what is the purpose of such a map? And unfortunately, this is not only the way of making maps somewhere far from Finland, because here in Finland we can make similar maps and actually about the same phenomenon. This is the corona map by THL, and it has a very similar characteristics as the map by Johns Hopkins University. If here, for example, we focus on the total number of COVID-19 cases around Helsinki metropolitan area, we see that Kirkkonummi and Kerava has around 1,000 cases, Espoo and Vantaa around 10,000 cases, and Helsinki over 26,000 cases. This is very difficult, or of course impossible, to see from the map where all compared cities and municipalities are represented with a point symbol having precisely the same size. I know those numbers because of the interactive nature of the map service. But from the visualization point of view, the explanation comes from the classification used, from which we see that MapMaker has decided to represent all cases above 1,000 by a fixed size symbol. And by knowing the excellent and really valuable extensive work done behind this service for setting up the APIs for COVID data, it's truly pity that the visual representations have not got similar attention as the other technical issues for setting up the service. Maps telling about phenomena are of course not limited to COVID-19 maps, but there is plenty of others containing even classical examples of cartographic flaws. I know that Stefani Urmanis from Yle will talk later today about the election maps of Finland and also about the technical solutions to overcome the most typical challenges, so that I won't go into more details about those issues. But and also the use of corporate maps for this type of data. But the other really frequently seen problem today is the use of global map projections, such as WebMercator in maps representing only Finland. An example of this is shown in the first map on the left. And if you compare that map to the map in the middle, you see that actually the area of northern Finland gets seriously exaggerated. And if we take a closer look on the exaggeration effect and draw these Tissot's ellipses on the maps of Finland, we see that areal exaggeration is more than double in the northernmost parts of Finland. But after all, who cares? Is it really that big thing? I will let you decide. Here's a lady drawn in appropriate proportions. And now on the right, you see the same lady. as it is shown in Webmercator projection. Of course, the difference is not huge, but it is a difference anyway. And when taking it into the cartographic context, the question is if I'm willing to provide distorted worldview, and if yes, then the question is why. For political map of Finland, we can observe that certain political parties gain direct benefits of using corporate representations of election results in Webmercator projection, while other political parties suffer for it. Luckily, this situation has improved a lot in media recently. But after seeing all these challenges, we inside the cartographic community might ask ourselves if we are maps-plaining. We easily take the role of the wise guy and explain again and again how maps should be made and how they should not be made. At the same time, people who do these maps in reality, let them be GIS or IT experts or graphic designers in media houses, they say that they already know all this. From this setting, the big question is how we move forward the best and the most efficient way to see higher quality maps made for media and decision makers in the future. Before giving the suggestions, let's summarize the main points what I have said until now. Firstly, we use maps for telling stories, and when doing that, we try to make people to understand the phenomena or the data behind the phenomena. Some of those stories are intentional, but some are unintentional. Both are important, and the most important is to understand the power of maps in information transmission. Secondly, it's important to understand that map is never a scientific document. It only tells the story of the author has put into it. The dilemma in our time is that on the other hand, we clearly live the best time to be a map maker. The availability of different types of tools and open data repositories are nowadays excellent, not to mention web as the platform for sharing cartographic outputs. On the other hand, we still see huge amount of maps that are difficult or even impossible to understand. And as shown in some of my examples related to map making, there still seems to be kind of a last mile problem. Big efforts are made for collecting and setting up spatial data services, but cartography is left like a last quick thing in such projects. What are then the ways we can expect to see higher quality cartographic products prepared for public audience and decision makers? Firstly, we should improve citizens and decision makers' ability to read and understand maps, and this way we can improve their capacity to demand more. And secondly, we need new type of collaboration between cartography experts and media or IT GIS experts. We have to get rid of this maps-plaining setting and start to really talk to each other. Cartography experts have to become more aware of extremely time schedules and budget limits of media and IT houses, and we have to start to think that costs of good cartography cannot exceed the limits the actors are capable of paying. The maps don't need to be perfect with infinite budget, since a lot can be done to improve maps just by taking into account number of basic cartography rules. And at the end, it should not cost more than making of a bad map. So thanks for listening, and I'm glad to take some questions if you have any.
Well, thank you, Juha. Make cartography great again. I really like the comparison you have there. Maybe we can invite Menno-Jan to join us. Maybe you can comment a little Juha's presentations to start with.
That's an honor. No, I enjoyed the presentation, and indeed, I touched upon the boundaries when we were dealing with the UN and the issues which were explained by you, were those who are there. I mean, the most funny thing is that the UN has a digital version of their boundary files to make their own maps. And in the beginning, we were not allowed to use it, because if they would give that boundary set to us, they would choose sides. Because of course, they follow rules like what the Security Council has agreed upon. But of course, not everybody agrees with that. So they are very much afraid of causing issues, so to say, with these boundaries. And the examples which were shown in the presentation were indeed the hotspot ones. Also, the South China Sea is, of course, one of these hot items where Taiwan is also involved, so to say. And the second part, also I enjoyed the presentation very much, and it's to the point.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions or comments on the chat channel during your presentation, Jan. There's a question on, is color interpretation also cultural dependent compared with white and black interpretation in Western world versus Asian?
Oh, it certainly is. It certainly is. I mean, in our part of the world, I guess we don't use very bright and, let's call it, yelling colors. We keep it a bit subdued, so to say. But indeed, if you go to Southeast Asia and those parts of the world, they use the full spectrum of colors which are available. So, and also the meaning of colors can be different. I mean, we always say that red and green, that's like the traffic lights, that we know it's safe and it's not safe. But in some cultures, that might be different. So, in a way, you have to be sensitive for it. But some like the red and the green, I guess that has been globally accepted. But in some locations, they might not completely agree. But it's certainly considering this. And again, if you use red and blue in the US for the elections, then the colors are really attached to the political parties. So if you then choose the wrong color, so to say, for the wrong topic, you might be in trouble. So it's sensitive. And in fact, that with most decisions we make, many of these decisions we make unconsciously because we were educated using our cartographic knowledge, so to say, and we simply apply it. And I think that nowadays you have to be a bit more aware what does this imply? I mean, I'm also involved in a Master of Cartography, which is a European Master of Cartography, and we have students from all over. And recently I had a Russian student, and she was studying the schools of thought of cartography, and she was really, let's say, having raised in the Soviet system, and I was raised, let's say, in the Western system, and then you saw differences, and they, that was very interesting also to be aware of that you think that the truth is what you see or what you learned, but there are multiple views, and I think to realize this is step one.
So orange is the safe color, right?
I don't know. It's, again, I explained why I choose it, because it's the Dutch national color. But it's
You see it in the football games a lot.
Yes. Well, all the Dutch teams wear orange. Yes.
Yeah. Well, there's another comment on. There's another comment on the COVID maps and about the classification of data where maximum value increases over time, like in COVID. So it's quite difficult to do maps. And I started to think that regarding COVID, I wonder if we could go back to day one, could anybody be capable of making any maps that would make any sense? Because it's really difficult to understand this COVID even for all the scientists. So maybe it's better not to make maps of the thing at all.
Well, but the issue which is addressed there, I think that's an interesting one. And once I touched upon it in a different context, because if you would like to automate your whole mapping process, and if indeed you think of a quarter plate map, and you start at the beginning when the numbers are low, and you don't change your classification system, after a while in time, all the values fit in the highest class. And that was the example, I guess, everything more than 1,000 in Finland with this number. If it continues, everything will be the same. So that also is a good argument, at least I use it as an argument, that you always need a cartographer, a human cartographer, to adapt these systems, because And that's, you mentioned map AI, and I'm also thinking about this quite a lot these days. And there's always the risk that that's a black box, and where we have no clue what happens anymore. So interesting, but challenging.
But still definitely doable. So that considering, for example, the map of Finland, so that there are ways to communicate even very clearly if you sort of change the classification over time. You just have to say it in the interactive interface. So that you just need to highlight it somehow, that okay, here is the moment that now the classification changed. But it can be done. And definitely it's better than to put all data in the highest class.
Yes, but there's one issue. If you then would have a map series comparing over time, you cannot compare because the classification has changed.
Yeah.
So it's tricky.
Yeah, it is tricky. And then of course you have to, so that then that is then the specific use case. And again, classification has to be adapted on that use case, so that there is no way of making one generic classification that fits for all.
Agreed.
I have one question still before we go to the break. We discussed about thematic maps mainly. We discussed about telling stories with maps. Back in the old days when there were no computers and everything was right, the paper maps, the topographic maps were pieces of art of cartography, because it was difficult to tell the right way what the nature is, which city is big and which is small and so on, where do you place the text and so on. So is this important anymore as we have the computer maps, or is there the traditional making good looking maps with nice colors to do some orienteering? Is it still there?
No, I think the problem is not away if you do it by computer. I mean, you still want to portray the landscape, and if you want to put geographical names on it, the location where you put them is still sensitive, so to say. And of course, in a way, people work on algorithms to do it, and some are already very good. But I think it's still critical. So the basic problem remains the same. Only there are different tools, so to say. And probably the people who did it by hand, it's always an enjoyment to look at these maps. It's really the art part of cartography, the art and science we are doing in cartography, and this art part makes it interesting. And that art part also gives us trouble, because in research nowadays we all talk about reproducibility, and so we have to be able to reconstruct based on other one's data the same product, and probably we might end up with the same classification and same map type, but we might use different designs because that's the art part. So that's also interesting. Okay, that's a different topic, but it just popped up.
Yeah, but fully agree. So that definitely the cartography challenges are still there, no matter if we are talking about topographic maps or thematic maps. I just left it out because when we are distant from borders, in my opinion, the topographic maps message is quite neutral. Of course, when it represents borders, then it's far from neutral. But thinking inland Finland and how the topography is presented, then the story is to express what there is in the nature, and there is not any specific motivation to create bias for that.
Well, I tend to disagree here. I mean, it also, again, depends on where you are on the globe. Let's move to the Netherlands. I mean, it's also the selection of symbols in these maps. I mean, let's say we put symbols for fences higher than 2 meters, then they're on the map. Or if there is a little hill, I call it hill, which is 1 meter high, we put it on the map. Because that's from the past, then a Dutch soldier could hide behind the hill. And if a fence was more than 2 meters high, it was not expected to climb. And it's the same with canals, wider than 3 meters. They have a different symbology because a Dutch soldier was not supposed to be able to jump further than 3 meters. You see? So the choices you make, even in a topographic map, they have a certain background. and you cannot call them neutral.
Yeah.
I mean,
Hey, we have
every country is different.
We still have a question. Pyry has raised hand and is waiting to comment something. So we are on our break already, using the break, but this is interesting. So Pyry, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Are you hearing me?
Yep.
Yes.
Good. Pyry Kettunen from National Land Survey of Finland, and thank you for the two very nice presentations. I ask a question from Menno, because we have discussed these things a lot with Juha already at the Department of Geoinformatics and Cartography. So based on your wide experience, and I know you have a lot of experience all around the globe, how maps are used and how they have been applied. How do you see how much they have been misused for decision making? Is it even possible to measure how they are misused in decision making in some concrete or measurable manner? Certainly, all the examples we saw from you and Juha were great and clear. But then, can we also see advancement in using maps while we get better communicating their inabilities of communicating everything at the same time?
So if I translate, your question is, you ask if I know how the maps are used for a negative purpose in reality. Is that what you mean?
Not exactly, but misinterpreted in decision-making situations. What could be the amount, and is there a way to measure that?
I think that's difficult. I mean, if you read the book from Mark Monmoyer, How to Lie with Maps, he has some examples in there. And also Edward Tufte in his books gives some examples of where things went wrong. But I think, yeah, and there are many cartoons of using maps that people end up in a canal because they use the navigation system and don't look to reality anymore. I mean, these examples are of course known, but it's difficult to quantify yeah, how many mistakes are being made with maps. I don't know of any reporting of this where numbers have been mentioned or particular cases have been mentioned. I no doubt, I believe that that's the case, but how dramatic it is, I mean, okay, yeah, sometimes a war has started because of errors, like it's known with Google. I think it was Honduras and Nicaragua. They started almost a war because Google made an error on the border, and then one army moved in because now it's ours on the map. So that type of thing. Yeah, no, it's other things are more anecdotal. So I have no hard evidence.
For sure, and thank you for that. This example was already a clear case that even severe misdecisions, so to say, can be made. Okay, thank you very much.
So let's be careful out there when making maps. Well, now we need to have a short break for everybody to stretch a little before the next session. I thank you, Menno, Jan, really a lot. It was really good presentation to start with. Thank you, Juha, also to open the tough issues that we have. And like I said, I really like make cartography great again. Comparison as even though it comes from a maybe not so popular source, but yeah, we really need cartography, and that's what we will be discussing and talking in the future, I believe, in the Care Forum content together with the Finnish Cartographic Society. This has been really interesting. So thank you, gentlemen, and now we go for a break, and we will come back at 2:30 Finnish time, and we will continue in Finnish with the 3 interesting samples. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. It was a pleasure. And good luck this afternoon. I will not be there because I might understand the maps I see, but not the explanation. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Menno Jan.